Hello, Internet. This is the Fair Housing Insiders. And today we're going to be talking about a scary topic, when to involve a fair housing attorney. But don't worry, we are here to help. Let's dive in. Hello, housing providers and property managers. This is another episode of the Fair Housing Insiders. And today we're going to be digging into a pretty complicated and, I'll admit, a little anxiety-inducing topic, and that's when should you involve a fair housing attorney because of a potential fair housing issue on your property or even just a question. I know that a lot of people don't know when to take that step. So that's why we have with us today Leslie Tucker, a fair housing attorney that helps us through all of these complicated matters. Leslie, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. And I agree, this is kind of one of the more under-discussed topics, but it's certainly an important one. So, not every question needs a lawyer, but some do. So the challenge is kind of figuring out when to do that, when to take that step.
Well, let's see if we can help out our community with answering that complicated question. So obviously some teams in property management hesitate to involve legal counsel. They worry it's too expensive or it makes them look unsure, like they're actually escalating it, and maybe it would be fine if they just let it go or tried to handle it themselves. What would you say to those kind of behaviors?
And I hear that a lot, that if I reach out to the attorney, then it's kind of obvious that I don't know what I'm doing, right? Or that I don't know my business and my policies. And really what it is consulting your attorney doesn't show weakness. It shows good judgment. And in terms of the cost, the cost of a phone call or a written opinion really is nothing when you compare it to the risk of what you're going to spend on an investigation or potentially a lawsuit. So think of more of your counsel as a resource as opposed to a last resort.
That's a really good way of putting that, a good thought. And obviously, as we've seen in this industry, sometimes hesitation leads to guessing, and guessing in fair housing is one of those fair housing don'ts we talk about so often.
Right, exactly. So if you're in doubt, that's a signal to pause and to get guidance.
Got it. All right. Well, let's get a little bit more specific here then. So what kinds of situations should people immediately prompt a property manager, like red flag, time to call an attorney?
So there's a few of them, I think, where it might be appropriate to trigger, seeking advice from counsel. One is if you are receiving conflicting advice. Maybe you've gotten conflicting advice from a trainer, from a conference speaker, or maybe, a regional manager, a manager at a different property. If something just doesn't sound right or it's confused you, it might be best to get some legal advice. Another time is if you are unsure whether one of your policies violates the Fair Housing Act, a policy on your occupancy limits, denying an assistance animal, maybe denying someone on the basis of their criminal background. So if you are unsure, that might be a good time to reach out to a lawyer. Another one is if a complaint has either been filed or if someone has threatened you with a complaint. So, an attorney is not required to handle a fair housing complaint for you, but it's often a really good idea. And it's a good idea to have someone that knows the ins and outs of this process and of the law so they can advise you on when you may need to settle, when it's a really good idea just to settle the case rather than fight it. And lastly, if you receive new HUD guidance, let's say, or updates to guidance that's out there, and you're not sure how that might apply to you or your policies, seek counsel and they can explain that to you.
Yeah, that's. I'd also imagine you'd say, don't wait until something has already gone wrong, right?
Right. Prevention on the front end is much cheaper than damage control on the back end.
Yeah, and for our community out there, housing providers, we've talked about it before, but if you didn't know, fair housing investigations can be insanely complicated. They can be very long and they can be very, very expensive. I'm talking about $10,000 potentially on the low end, and it can be far, 10 times more expensive than that. And it could potentially take years and affect people's careers. It's just not something you want to leave to chance or just let it sit in the closet until it's time for it to just burst out and get in your face. So yeah, be proactive when it comes to this stuff. Now, here's something that I've personally seen a lot of this industry. I know you have too. I'm sure there's people in our audience that have seen it too. Is a manager attends a conference or fair housing seminar and gets one version of the law from a so-called expert. But then their supervisor heard something different at another event from potentially another so-called expert. What's the right move when the advice conflicts?
Right. And I mentioned that earlier. This is something that happens, and I've heard from clients. So when you have evolving topics like criminal history screening or assistance animals verification, in those instances, kind of the only reliable answer is one that applies directly to your jurisdiction and your company policies. And getting an attorney's advice should be the best person to do that, not necessarily a speaker at a conference. Different states interpret federal guidance different ways. And I see this all the time out of different HUD offices interpreting things in different ways. So if you're unsure, go back to your attorney and get some clarity and maybe some specific direction related to your property.
So in this case, trust the legal source, not the loudest voice at a conference, correct?
Generally, yeah. I mean, conference presenters are often very knowledgeable, but they're generally, not your attorney. So don't change your policy based on something you heard at a session without verifying it first.
Gotcha. Perfect. Well, if there's anything that our community takes away from this, hopefully, is to not shy away from consulting with a fair housing attorney when matters like this come up. So obviously, if you do have fair housing legal questions, we please reach out to somebody. Obviously, Leslie Tucker is a fair housing attorney, and you can find out more about her and her law firm at fairhousingfirm.com. We'll put that in the show notes. But even if you don't go to her, make sure you are not just talking with an attorney, but one that specializes in fair housing law and investigations. So Leslie, again, thank you so much for being here today. I know this is a really kind of dicey topic and it makes people nervous, but that's okay. That's why we are here to help. And to our community, thanks so much for tuning in. Make sure to feel free to ask any questions in the comments section. Hit that like button, that subscribe button, that notification bell, and share this with your team. We've got a lot more informational videos coming up over the next year. So thanks for sticking with us. Happy training.